funny. You ought to see the view from the pulpit. You have the view from the pew. I have the view from the pulpit. There was elbows flying everywhere. I tried to bribe some of the men who come up to me and said things, but it didn't work. The best one was Beverly. She just shared this with me a moment ago. She said, there's only one other person that lives in my house, and she is a sweetie. Literally. She's got this little starved to death dog. We got to get a picture of Sweetie sometime. And she is a sweetie. So she said, I don't live with a grouch. We are in Exodus. Exodus chapter 15. As our text opens, Israel is finally leaving Egypt. It's been a hard, difficult few years. By the way, we need to keep in mind why they were there. They were there because of their own failures. Just like so many of us have found ourselves in our own Egypt because of something of our own making. That was the case with Israel. And Israel was used by the Egyptians. Almost slave labor. They were hard taskmasters. One thing, they hated the Hebrew people. But they took advantage of the opportunity to use them for their own purpose. So because of that, just as much as Egypt hated Israel, Israel hated Egypt. It's bad. And it was getting worse. Egypt was upping the demands. More labor. Work harder. They were cutting out privileges. It drove the people of God to their knees. And they cried out to God. What a good place to start getting out of your trouble. They cried out to God. And God heard them. Now, He had been aware of everything that was going on. God was waiting on something. He was waiting on them to cry out to Him. And they did. They did. And God raised up Moses. Though there was a lot of hesitation on Moses' part, he was the man. It was obvious. And reluctantly, he took the job. God convinced Moses, I'll be with you all the way. After a long period of time in which Moses would go before Pharaoh and say, let my people go, Pharaoh laughed at him. And through successive periods in which calamities came upon Egypt, finally, reluctantly, Pharaoh's had enough. He said, go on. I think that death of the firstborn was the one that really sealed the deal. Go on. So Moses, with Aaron by his side, gathers the children together. By the way, estimates are anywhere from 3 1/3 to 3.5 million Jews. He gathers them together, and they make their exodus. You ever wonder where that came from? They leave Egypt. Finally, they feel free. They are elated, right? For about 3 days. We pick it up. Exodus 15, verse 22. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah, meaning, obviously, bitter. And the people, watch this, murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So, when you live with, or you work with, are your neighbors two complainers? Moses gives us some good advice. Number one, try to discover the cause of the bitterness. Why are they angry? Why are they grouchy all the time? Verse 23 gives us the answer. They could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Now, what's going on? And that's what Moses does. He finally concludes as to why that they are so bitter. But let's back up just a moment. Let's remind ourselves. There are times when complaints are legitimate. Being a pastor all these years, many times I've had people come to me and complain about something. And through observation or through more discovery, I begin to find out that in reality there was a reason for the complaint. It was legitimate. And there are times we're going to come to that situation. Someone we live with, someone we work with, complaining all the time. They actually have a reason, a legitimate reason. So the first principle in dealing with a complainer, someone who's grouchy, is to try to find out why they're like they are. Now, in the case of the children of Israel, it was not legitimate. But sometimes it is. Try to discover the cause of their bitterness. Number two, as they are complaining, continue to set an example. Verse 22 says, Moses brought, literally led Israel from the Red Sea. The complaining's been an ongoing thing. It started almost immediately after they exited Egypt. They travel and they come to the Red Sea. Now, what are we going to do? And because of the storyline, we think sometimes, well, that was just a little way to get your feet wet crossing. No. No. At this particular time, season, this would have been a tremendous volume of water. Now, keep in mind, going back to Pharaoh, he's still angry. So he has let them go, but he's seizing. He tells his generals, he said, gather the army together. We're going after them. We're going to kill every one of them. They want it out. They're not going anywhere else. We're going to see to it. So it's almost as though they come to the Red Sea, they don't see any way possible to get across, and then perhaps they can almost hear the hoofbeats coming. You know what they did? They go to Moses. Well, this is a fine thing that you've done. Were there not enough grave sites in Egypt to bury us? Did you have to bring us out here in the wilderness? They're complaining, quarreling. And through every bit of that, Moses focuses on what God has called him to do. He's faithful to his calling through every bit of it. And if you've not been able to find out why this person is complaining all the time, there's no reason that you can come up with. Just keep focused. Keep doing the job that God has called you to do. To be a husband, to be a wife, to be a co-worker, to be a neighbor, on and on and on. Continue to set an example. Number 3, and this is so important. Take the situation to the Lord. Chapter 15. Verse 25. And he, Moses, cried unto the Lord. And the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. Now, I said a moment ago, their complaining was really not legitimate because the God who had been there for them through every bit of the ordeal had shown himself faithful to them. They forgot that. They couldn't remember that. And we'll see that again later on. So it really was not legitimate. But that being said, you got to have water. Now, the human body can make it several days, an amazing amount of days without food. I don't buy that one bit, but that's what the medical people tell us. This human body cannot make it without water. Just a few days. Can't do it. And that's why they are so upset. So watch this. God tells Moses, see that tree? Partial part of a tree. He said, throw it in the water. And Moses, the obedient servant of God, picks up this tree and throws it in the water. You know what the result was? The water was made sweet. That just means it was drinkable. It was no longer bitter. Now, I feel I need to share this with you. If you have bad water, I'm not so sure going out and cutting a limb off of a tree and throwing it in your water will help you. You got to remember God did this. It was the tree that God told Moses to throw in the water. That was the obedience of the man of God. The point is, Moses went before the Lord and he cried out to him. If I would have been Moses, I would have prayed something like this, and I don't think that it would have been wrong. I would have said, Lord, we have came a long way. You have been faithful through everything that we have faced. We are now on this side of the Red Sea. We're safe. We've annihilated the armies of Pharaoh. You have protected us. We've got to have something to drink. And it was probably about that time that God said, got it covered. Moses threw the tree into the water, and the water was drinkable. If you're living with or working with or around someone a lot who is a grouch, why not try something that may seem really out there? How about praying for them? How about going before God? With an honest heart, say, God, if it's me, if I'm the problem here, show it to me. If it's not me, help me to understand my spouse, my family member, my coworker. Take it before the Lord. that should always be our first response. Go before God. I didn't really want to put this one in, but I thought I had to. Don't take the bitterness and anger personally. The next problem that they will incur has to do with the food shortage. God has given them drinkable water. Some time goes on, and they have nothing to eat. New problem. Guess what they do? Once again, they go before Moses and they complain. And it's at that time that God assures Moses and Aaron that the children will be fed. Over in chapter 16, verse 8, Moses tells Israel, "This shall be when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, for that the Lord heareth your murmurings, which ye murmur against him." And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord. That's why I said I'd just soon let this point out. But I couldn't. Because it's so easy when you hear complaint after complaint after complaint to become discouraged and to just take it personally. I sure am glad Moses wasn't that way, aren't you? If Moses would have been that way, he would have looked at Aaron and said, "Hey, I'm out of here. You deal with them. I'm out of Egypt. I'll find me a place. I'm done with them." But he didn't. Again, he goes back before the Lord. He said, "Lord, the people are complaining." And God must have said, "You're telling me?" They're not complaining against you. They're complaining against me. Now, again, I bring up the point that sometimes complaints are legitimate. When I hear complaints, I honestly go before God to see if there's something that I need to change or something I need to do. But it's so easy to not take that personally. It's easy to feel like everybody's out to get us. Number 5, try to shift the focus to the work of the Lord. And there's a reason for that. Verse 26, God said to the people, "If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and wilt give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee." Here is one of the best antidotes for bitter people. Get them involved in the Lord's work. It's what Moses did. Went before the children under the leadership of God. And he said, we're not there yet. We have a promise, but we're not there yet. It's our job to keep on marching, to pursue the place that God has promised us. Get your focus off of yourself and get your focus upon God. If you do that, why is that so important? If you do that, they won't have time to complain. They'll be too busy doing whatever God has called them individually or collectively to do. Number 6, remember, God is the healer, not you. In verse 26, God told the people, I am the Lord that healeth thee. Now, there are things that we must do. And if there are things that we must do, and normally there are, then God will direct us. He will lead us in what we should be doing. We can't just sit back and say, okay, Lord, you take care of it. No, there are things He has called us to do. And we need to do them. That's called responsibility. There's some things that we'll never be able to do. There are certain things that only God will be able to do. And when we are doing the things that we are responsible to do, and God is doing the things that only He can do, guess what? Great things happen. Great things happen. Ultimately, it all comes down to God. Close with this one. Be patient. Be patient. Patience is something that many of us struggle with, right? Down through the years, I've made some inroads into this. But I'm going to be the first to tell you that I have not arrived yet. I still have an impatient streak in me. Much of that comes from my little mother, who was very impatient. Very. I'm going to have somebody to blame it on. I am not as impatient now as I was several years ago. But I still struggle. And when we're living with, working with other people, just continually harp and quarrel, that's when our patience factor needs to increase. See, I don't know how to do that. Try doing what I did. God help me in this area. Help me be more patient. I need your help. And by the way, you're not informing God, He already knows it. God helped the children of Israel out of Egypt because they came to Him and begged Him for help. There is nothing wrong with going before God. Whatever it is, it could be patience, it could be many other things. Go before God and say, God, I need help. I need help. Be patient. What was the first point? Try to find out what is making that person or those persons so bitter. Try to get to the root. And while you're doing that, just to continue to set an example. Do what God has called you to do. Take your situation before the Lord regularly. Lord, I need your help. Try as best you can to not take it personal. That's not always easy. Get them focusing on the work of the Lord. Always remember, God is the healer, not you. We all encounter bitter people. It seems more today than ever. It's never been easy working in a place where you work with people on a one-on-one basis. It's never been easy. And it seems to me like it's more difficult, it's harder now than it ever has been before. Be patient. Take it before the Lord. Let's bow together.